Micheal is somebody who is passionate about education, who is a hard taskmaster, who likes perfection, demands perfection from himself and from others.
Where did the journey begin?
I have a very fond memory of spending time with my father, and he was forever quizzing me on things like when does a town become a city, and how many centimeters in a meter, those sorts of random things. Early school days. So there was always this notion of knowledge and information, which is interesting because neither of my parents finished high school, and none of my brothers or sisters did either. So I was the first kid to actually finish high school and then go on to university. The more I became involved in education, the more I liked education. And I think just as I'm talking, I suddenly remembered I was a voracious reader as a kid. I was a solitary sort of kid. I didn't have lots of friends. I was not very well socialized, if I look back now. So I spent a lot of time going to the library and reading books. So knowledge became this really important thing for me.
And why teaching?
Okay, so teaching was one of those things, as I said, with a family with no experience of higher education. It's sort of the first options are teaching or nursing, and I went into teaching. And I think if my parents had been different people, better educated, then probably more options for careers would have been available in my head.
Sure.
They were certainly available, but they weren't available in my head as possibilities. There was a government bursary that allowed you to become a teacher, which I took, so it meant that my fees were paid, which made life easy, and I became a teacher and then loved it. That just was something that I was good at and thoroughly enjoyed.
Print and digital, what would you say are the differences, and what are the common things, and what are your view on either or?
I don't think that ebooks are the solution to education in the world. And my reason is this: books are not the solution to education in the world, because textbooks in and of themselves can be a really bad taskmaster for bad teaching. So if you get bad teaching is a teacher standing in front of the classroom reading the textbook to the kids.
Yeah, sure.
And it happens everywhere. And whether the teacher's reading from a glass screen or whether she's reading from a paper book, she's still standing in front of the classroom doing that. That's not education, that's just spoon feeding. Digital education provides a lot of opportunity, but then it's got to be digital education that takes into account all the affordances that technology brings, the ability to collaborate at a distance, the ability to communicate with others, the ability to create digitally. I remember one of the projects that we gave our grade 8s was to develop a little newspaper. And they got 3 months to develop a 4-page newspaper, because basically they had to handwrite each article and stick it together. Whereas nowadays the same project could be achieved in a week simply because of the technology. Or skimming an article on the internet, you ask a question of Google and you get 10,000 answers. You scroll through all the answers and you read the first line of every article, and then you decide what you want to read. That teaches a particular way of reading which isn't conducive for good studying. So we need to teach kids that when you do digital reading, you've got to apply the same rules that you apply if you're reading in a paper textbook. So I think the complaint that people have that digital reading is bad for kids and etc., I think is just people not training kids how to read digitally properly.
What are other differences that you've actually, or changes that you've actually seen across the field?
First time I went back into a classroom after being out of a classroom for about 10 years, I was surprised at how children had changed. I was lecturing university students who were becoming teachers, and I went into the school and I just thought, goodness, kids have changed. They were a lot more aggressive than I had ever had experienced. They were a lot more demanding, and I didn't think that was a bad thing. I thought that was a good thing, and more prepared to speak out than kids when I was teaching even 10 years prior to that. I don't think the way teachers have changed has changed much from when I was at primary school in the 1970s, because you can go into most primary schools today and the kids are being taught in exactly the same way. And it wasn't the best way. It wasn't a bad way necessarily, otherwise I couldn't have achieved as much as I did, but it's certainly not the best way to be educating.
Yeah, and it's quite rare to actually find people that are actually doing what they're passionate and what they love. Because I find majority of people, they stumbled on whatever they're doing. Someone that's actually thinking of taking a similar path to what you've taken, that either they're about to go into studying or they're currently studying about to finish, what would you advise them?
Don't. And let me explain why I say don't. Don't become a publisher. I think what we forget, and you raised at the beginning, we were speaking a lot about passion. I don't believe that we should necessarily do our passions as our jobs.
Sure.
And my reasoning for that is that job supply is limited. There are only so many jobs for so many people. And lovely if we got thousands or hundreds of thousands of students who are so excited because that's the job that they have passion for. I want to manage people. I have a passion for managing people. I don't know how grade 12 can have a passion for managing people, but nonetheless, so they go off and they study management. But there are only X thousand manager jobs available in South Africa. We got a clear oversupply of people who've studied management. So for me, it's about really researching the future of a career that you want to go into, so that you know that when you finished your studies, there actually is going to be job availability. Not necessarily a job. I mean, maybe you're a really hopeless person and you scrape through and you got a bad attitude and you go for interviews and you never get a job. Fine, you didn't deserve one. But somebody who works hard, does all the right things, there should be a job available for you when you get out there. But if the environment is such that there is no job available to you, that's great, and there's nothing wrong with a good education. It'll always help you, but you could end up having an education that is so limited that you can't do very much with it. So if you have 20 students who graduate at the end of this year from University of Pretoria in publishing, there's a publishing degree, there's 20 more students who don't have jobs, because unless the 100 of us or so who die or leave the industry, those jobs are not going to suddenly be created, you know. So for me, that's a key thing, and it's that sort of supply demand of economics, of making sure that there is going to be. And then I think also in terms of technology, 3.5 million jobs will be lost to technology, but 4.5 million jobs will be created because of technology. Now, if you're studying something now that technology is going to wipe out in the next couple of years, what are you going to do when you finish studying? You need to be finding out what those alternative careers are. For me, broader education is important. It's not always possible, but I was lucky. I did a bachelor's degree in English, psychology, French. I mean, I had every subject under the sun, but gave me more flexibility than would have. And I think the other thing to be aware of is that university is not the only solution. It was always amusing to me, my brothers, one became a plumber and one became an electrician. And when I was teaching, they always earned far more than I did with their grade 10s and technical college educations. And yeah, I think people need to look beyond university. The TVET colleges have got a lot to offer.
True. So almost getting a sense of, you go to study, actually look at the job market itself and what's actually active, the jobs that are currently active. Now, speaking to publishing students, you're saying you'd actually advise them not to. To people that have actually already graduated, what would you say other than publishing? Because what you've mentioned in terms of the job availability, it's crazy. What are other alternative careers they could look at with that same qualification?
Well, somebody who's done a publishing degree, for example, is going to have done a Bachelor of Information Sciences degree, which means that they've got a whole lot of stuff around libraries, about curating knowledge, about analyzing and categorizing. And I think what they need to be doing is they need to be going back and looking at what they studied and identifying not the apparent end goal, being a publisher, but what does this knowledge give me that I can actually then apply in another field?
If you're not really working where, if it's a passion, that's what you really desire the most, what that does to you, internally must be crazy.
But then you got to work the alternative. We need money to live. Do a job and then do your passion after hours. You know, there doesn't have to be this I mean, there's that
stuck,
nonsense.
yeah.
If you can, there's that quote about if you can earn money doing your hobby, then you're going to be the happiest person or some rubbish like that. I mean, come on. Very few of us can turn our hobbies or passions into careers. Yeah. Broaden knowledge rather than refine knowledge. So yeah, do courses, do all sorts of things, all the MOOCs that are available, the Coursera's and the edX's and those sorts of things. I think those are really powerful ways to find new avenues of possible future career, and I think it'll take a while before companies are prepared to accept those sorts of micro credentials, but I think we will get to a point where people realize that actually, even though you did your edX via the internet, it's still actually a worthwhile qualification that you've got. I think that will change, so that would be a useful way of doing it.
It's COVID, and with COVID happening, how has that impacted the way you work? Before, and to now, what are the difference, the pros and cons you've actually picked up?
Well, for me personally, it was the best thing ever. I'm in a very fortunate position. I have an easy place to work from. I don't have children to look after. I don't have a family that I need to look after. I think for people in those situations, life has been particularly scary and horrible when you're trying to manage children plus homeschooling plus your career. I think that has been really hard. And I'm lucky because I have a job where I can be flexible. So if I wake up early, I can start work early and just get going.
Sure.
And if I wake up late, I can just work later. That's been a whole lot easier than having to commute to the office, work from the confines of a desk.
I can imagine if you're working from home, it's actually difficult to say at this time I'm actually logging off, or I'm actually at this point I'm stopping. I'm stopping and I'm just dedicating to the rest of my day to family, or it just becomes your own time.
Explore values. What do you value? What's most important to you? Sitting in front of your computer, working, or being with your family? That's my answer, because yes, we have to work, and yes, we put in those hours, and whether you were working at the office or working at home, you're still going to put in the hours. I'm not so convinced about why people find themselves sitting behind their computers working until all hours because they're working from home. In my opinion, they're just hiding from their family.
Yeah, that's it.
And it was why else? Think about it. The person gets up, they drive for 40 minutes to get to the office, they commute by whatever. Then they work at the office for say they finish work at 5. Then they're going to commute home until they'll be home by 6. And then they would be with their family. So now they don't have to do the commute. So if they work until 6 o'clock, then theoretically it's time to be with the family. So why are they answering emails at 7 o'clock at night? Just because turn the computer off, unless your family's not as important.